You are now listening to Creative Hora. Hi everyone, welcome to Creative Hora. I'm Mary,
And I'm Dalia.
and we're super excited to take you back again on another episode with us. But before we get started, friend, how have you been lately?
Yeah, friend, thank you so much for that question. The vibe check is always a great opportunity to get centered and just check in with myself and with you as
Yes.
well around how I'm feeling this week. I would say this week has been very interesting. We're recording this episode 30 days after the election, which we'll dive a little bit more into that. But at this moment, I am feeling at peace, which is weird for me to say that. I can to expand on that. I think part of the reason why I'm feeling this calmness, this feeling of peace, is because there's a
Yeah.
lot of acceptance. I've had a lot of time to reflect on the post-election results, to even reflect on my own individual journey, and there's a lot of acceptance of letting go of specific areas that are out of my control and being at
Right.
peace with that. But friend, like,
I
how are
like
you
that.
feeling? How are things on your end?
Yeah, no, I think to your point, love our vibe check because it kind of helps me ground before we dive into our episode even today. But I think the word that came in mind is motion, in motion. So I feel like I've been in motion a lot, whether that's through more internally or inwardly, navigating through feelings, but even physically, even coming back from a trip from another country, went to Mexico City, so I was very much in motion there outwardly. So I think that's the best word to describe how I'm feeling this week is, yeah, like the in motion inwardly, but then also physical in motion, like moving around. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, friend, I know you had a very exciting trip to Mexico City.
Yeah.
Before we jump in, if you were to share with our audience like one or two
Mm.
takeaways from that trip, what would they be?
Yeah, I mean, I think one takeaway is for me, definitely like the warmth and friendliness of people. I think it
Mm,
just reminded me of what like community means and what being in a new place mean and disconnecting from the place that I'm familiar with. So everyone I encountered, whether it was Uber drivers or even like from the different vendors and that we encountered, everybody was just so friendly and warm. Like I think I've been in places where people are friendly, mind their business, but I think Mexico City is that place where you feel the friendliness of welcoming tourists, but also the warmth of like they
mm.
want to share their culture, their whether it's the food or the stuff they're selling. Again, from the vendor's perspective, I did feel a lot of like both, so I think that would be a key takeaway for the trip.
Oh, I love that, friend. I love that. It just really reminds me of, just the beauty and privilege of traveling, being able to connect with other humans
For
and
sure.
being that humanity in them simply by the sharing of their culture, their food, their customs.
Exactly.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that, friend.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And yeah, very different feelings from the
Yeah.
US. Again, post third day election. So it was a good moment of reflecting and processing everything that has happened.
Yeah, to the audience, we really wanted to take the time to, have a bit of a special episode, given that we're both, women of color that live on different coasts, West
Mm.
Coast, East Coast, and we think it's so important to talk about the post-election, feelings, thoughts, and share a little bit about how we've been processing this as it
Hmm.
also relates to the platform here with Creative Hora. So, friend, To get us started, I want to be really transparent with the audience that we've actually tried to film this multiple times.
Yes. Took us only a month to get
A
here.
month. Hence
But
why
yeah.
it's a 30-day special post-election.
Yeah.
And honestly, the reality is that this is a hard episode to film. We had previously scheduled time, and to be upfront, I felt like I felt ready to record, and I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to talk about this. I have so many
Mhm.
thoughts, so many feelings. And a couple of days before we were supposed to record, I actually came to Mary and I was like, friend, I can't do this. Like, I don't
Mhm.
think I'm ready to talk about this because I felt every single day post election there was like something new coming up in the way that I
Mhm.
was viewing the people around me, my
Right.
day-to-day interactions that just really heightened my emotions
Mhm.
post election. And yeah, so this is why this is such a hard episode to film, but I'm
Mhm.
excited, friend, to have this moment to reflect with you.
Mhm.
And now that we're both feeling a little better, we're feeling more
Yes.
present. Really, just share our thoughts with the audience.
Yeah, I definitely agree, in terms of the amount of times, or like the first time we tried recording this episode, I think both you and I, and specifically speaking, and I, like, didn't really process what happened. Like, everything was happening, and I felt the shock, felt everything, all the emotions, from the sadness, from, again, like, the shock, but not really shocked, like, all these conflicting emotions. So I do think it's timely that it has been a month. We've had space and time to sit with the results, sit with the emotions, sit with the things we're navigating, even outside of the results, but how it could potentially impact us. So I definitely feel ready to dive in and talk about it. So in that, I guess, friend, 30 days after, what have you been processing, or what feelings have you been navigating? So just so that we're acknowledging everything that we've processed in the past 30 days.
Yeah, friend. I would say the one emotion, and there was many. I was
Right,
angry.
right.
I was
Yes.
upset. I was hurting for my communities. Um, my I come from a family of immigrants, so many emotions on a personal level were coming up, and I think that was the hardest piece for me to accept. Earlier
Mhm.
with the election results was an acceptance that most of the US had voted against communities that I cared about. There
Mhm.
were big topics in immigration
Mhm.
was such a big issue on the
Mhm.
political campaign, as well as, trans rights was a big issue in the political
Mhm.
campaign. So I think just the acceptance on a personal level that I interact with these communities on a day-to-day basis. It's like very ingrained to the connections in who I am on a personal level. So yeah, I took it very personally, very, very personally.
Mhm. No, yeah, that makes sense, friend. I can only imagine, like, the heightened emotions in navigating the results, especially since it's every community that you do interact with, were essentially, for lack of better words, the targets and most vulnerable. And yeah, I can understand how that could be very just heightened of anger and sadness. So
But I'm so curious, friend, as you're really close to DC, like a 20-minute
mm,
drive from DC. From,
right, right.
I'm so curious to hear your perspective on the post-election results.
Yeah, it's interesting of by being physically within proximity of where things happened, and I think it's that energy of being in proximity to where the results happened, where results were, like, just blatantly, like, happen. I think that piece honestly disconnected me a bit because of, like, all the confusion and also sadness. And a part of me honestly was, like, so optimistic, even though there was, like, that it wouldn't happen, that we wouldn't land that way. But then also there was, like, the realistic side of me of, like, well, what the fuck did I expect? Like, I don't think we were ready. We were ready for this person. And I think I immediately always go into like why did this vote, like a lot of my friends are Latina, and I'm like trying to really understand like what do you think happened, or where's the
Mm,
50-50 split go. So I immediately go into
yeah.
that like curiosity and candor of trying to figure out like why or what, how did we get here, but also having that radical acceptance of like shit, well, we're here, what do I need to do to feel like continue feeling what I'm feeling, but also continue to be like, how do I tap into like communities that are under attack that I also resonate with. I also come from an immigrant family from Filipino descent. Like my family have, yeah, like just migrated to this country too, and I'm like, oh shit. And then and also being queer, I'm like, what does that mean for myself and my partner who are newly engaged? Like,
Mhm.
is like same sex marriage? Like a lot of questions just come to mind. So I felt like again being in close proximity forced me to kind of disconnect because I wouldn't say like spiraling, but there were just so many things I wanted to figure out why. So I just allowed myself to kind of sit with those like thoughts and questions while also like trying to balance out disconnecting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense, friend. And it's so interesting because there's no right or wrong approach.
For
I always
sure.
just find it interesting when I chat with you, just the contrast in the way that we process.
Mhm.
Like I almost went the opposite. Like I wanted to go find
Mm.
all the answers. I started like
Mm. Mhm.
listening to every political podcast that was talking about the voting breakdowns, like
Mhm.
analyzing why
Mhm.
certain groups
Mhm.
voted a certain way. I just wanted to get as much information as like possible in my brain.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
I was like, I
Mhm.
need to know. Like, which kind of leads me to what you alluded to a little bit that you were really anchored on like why certain communities voted this way, why why there was a shift in the way in the US across how we historically vote, a shift on
Right,
how we
right.
we voted for so long. And I guess on that piece, friend, were you surprised around like the shifts in the election results in terms of how specific communities voted?
Definitely surprised. And I was and I guess I was trying to really understand because again, a lot of my peer or friends are Latina. That I think that was the first community. Even I remember talking to you and trying to understand like,
Yeah,
what do you think the split happened? And then other friends that I spoke with who are definitely documented, like trying to understand their perspective as well. Like, where do you think that happened, or what's the story? Even I remember talking to my therapist who's also Latina. I was like, what do you think from your community, from your perspective? Because that was the most prominent to me was like the Latina vote was like a split 50.
yeah,
And I think hearing from lived experiences from people directly versus news sources helped me create like get enough information to like start understanding, start like processing like, oh my gosh, um like I like this is very shocking, like the different reasons or the contrasting reasons from like some of my friends said that it was because like Trump was a in quote Christian man, or like this family man who always had his family beside him, and that's one, I don't know, something about the Latina vote, like really liking that. And then some other friends said that he had a really huge media presence in very well known Latina media, like Univision, I think was one of them. He had a, so I think just
yeah,
compiling the lived experiences was more powerful for me at the time, at least within the first couple of days. Um, and then after that, that's when I started relying on more like news outlet databases. And but I do think that was the most shocking to me was like the Latina vote for now. But over time, like even in talking with you and other friends, like understanding also the Gen Zers vote, and yeah, like I think everything was just so shocking how
yeah,
much like this shift of like, are we, then are we just tired? Are we just like want to shake things up to the fullest extent? Like this is the most shake up the US have had in a while. Like what was it? Like what was those factors? So yeah, that's where my mind went in terms of
Yeah.
just the shockness and the results.
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely did spend like quite a bit of time like processing that a lot of Latinas voted, especially Latino men voted for Trump.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
That was like one piece that I wish I was more surprised by, but I actually was
Mm.
not surprised by. Um,
Mm.
like,
Mhm.
you mentioned like us not being ready for a Black female president, and I do feel like just speaking in my personal experience and my engagement with, my own Latina community, I know that's something that we're still struggling with. We're still struggling with
Mhm.
machismo. We're still
Mhm.
struggling with colorism
Mhm.
in our communities. So these are
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
real things that are very much embedded in the Latina speaking Mexican community that I've had to, that I'm working through unlearning, that I've, going to college, being exposed to different communities that were things that I intentionally have to work on in the present to continue to unlearn. And because of
Mhm.
that, those are things that when I think about the results, unfortunately, they don't shock me because
Mm.
of those two specific issues that I know are rampant in the
Got it.
Latina community.
Yeah.
I think where my biggest piece where I had to really step away was when I started to notice historical patterns.
Hmm.
And I love like history, and
Yeah,
of
you're
course,
I was like, "You're a history guru."
unfortunately, like it's very like I grew up with like the education system in the U.S., so it's very westernized history, which is a gap that I acknowledge. But
Mhm.
in terms of that perspective, I think about like from a global perspective across on an international level, there's a lot of big elections that have happened, big government changes that have happened, and I think it's not just the U.S. as a political power, geopolitical power. I think in Europe there's a lot of changes that's happening,
Yeah.
and ultimately to me that is like a bigger issue that across the globe, there's a lot of people that are unhappy with the ways their governments are functioning, the
Hmm.
economies are functioning. So it just makes me think
Mhm.
about, you know, in times of crisis. So if we think back to like, World War II and what people were dealing with in that time that led to them looking towards like a dictator in like different areas of Europe. It was like people were unhappy with their governments, people were
Mm.
unhappy with their
Mhm.
economies, people were unhappy with the way their society was heading. And so they were looking for people to fix that. And that's the thing that scares me about this election, that I feel like there was this similar feeling of like disengagement with their government and unhappiness with the government, that
Mhm.
they saw Donald Trump and the political campaign as a breakaway from like
Hmm.
this
Mhm.
status quo where all these aspects of the
Right, right.
government that they were unhappy. And I thought that was really interesting because I had traditionally seen the Republican Party as a very like, you know, what do they call it, establishment
Mhm.
figure,
Mhm.
and Donald Trump really positioned himself as anti-establishment,
So
anti-status quo.
interesting.
And
That's a
I
good
feel
point.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, that feeling of, oh, this is someone that is like anti the establishment is kind of what makes me think people voted for this man. They were looking for someone that to save them, essentially save their government, as they saw it. So that's kind of one thing that I'm processing, because those type of
Mhm.
things do scare me, because I think about on a larger
Mhm.
perspective, like how much power we're willing to give someone that we think will solve all our issues. Just considering the fact that Donald Trump won with a
Mm.
big gap.
Right,
He
right.
he won the Senate. He won the House of Republicans, the House of Representatives. Sorry, the House of Representatives. So he won with big margins in all these areas. And so, yeah, I
Hmm.
think that's a piece as well that I was thinking about with like political power, having a
Mhm.
president that's stepping in with that much political power, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's quite scary.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's so cliche, but the whole term of history repeats himself. We need to learn from our history comes in. It's so important because I think we learn like from those past and seeing the patterns and the trends. And like you just mentioned, there's similarities. Obviously we're in a different era, different time frame, but similarities in the root cause and the root emotional depthness of like the dissatisfaction, to your point, like whether it's the economy, the government themselves, the rulers of our country. So I think that's where like really looking into our past and admitting those shortcomings. And I don't know if the US has done that really well. I mean, and I think, I mean, I can't speak for other countries, but again, like I think that's maybe where we haven't learned in terms of like those shortcomings. And now we're here. So I
Yeah.
like that perspective that you brought, friend.
And friend, as we are, we talked a little bit about our feelings, we talked a little bit about kind of our perspective on the post-election results. We have this incredible platform that we've built for the last 2 years, Creative Hora.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Mm-hmm.
had a variety of artists, creators that have come onto our platform and
Right.
shared their
Right.
stories.
Mm-hmm.
As we're thinking about, the next phase of our platform, because we're continuously growing, like, what role do you see our platform playing in
Yeah.
just creating space for our creators and to really navigate the chaos or the changes that will be happening in the next 4 years?
Yeah, and I think I love this question because like to your point, the creatives, the everyday creatives we're interacting with identify one of their intersecting identities is either whether they're trans, whether they're like they're undocumented, POC, like all the communities that's just under attack under this future presidency. I do think I want to just acknowledge that and hold space there. But I do think specifically our role and an individual as well. I think having spaces like this and tapping into the communities like ours and our platform that really honor and validate and hold space for those communities that are under attack or just in a very vulnerable, they're already in a vulnerable position, but
Yeah.
even now more so they're in an extra vulnerable position. So holding space where they feel seen, holding space where they can just be within their existence is so important, and really uplifting and highlighting their stories so they can continue to feel seen. I think is one of our roles as creatives and co-hosts of Creative Aura is to continue to hold that space for them. Because even for me, when reflecting back and again, like how I navigated it, I immediately thought about all like the communities that where I feel loved, where I feel seen, where I feel validated, um, and that's how like I think we can continue to make progress, continue to hold space to for us to be grounded, but also pay it forward for all those communities that again we've interacted with so many with intersecting identities that are being impacted by this future presidency. So in sum, I think just holding space and continue to highlight their stories, continuing to validate their existence is one of our roles that we can do in having this platform.
Yeah, Brian, I definitely agree with you. In terms of the platform, we started this Creative Aura with the intention of connecting with diverse creators that had,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, you know, a variety of intersexual identities. Our
Right.
intention
Right.
was to elevate these creators, learn from them, and give them
Mm-hmm.
space to, share their story. That has been critical to our platform,
Mm-hmm.
and if anything, we just want to double down on that. We want to double down
Right.
on continuing and being intentional about the diverse creators that we bring on the platform and sharing their stories with our audience. That will continue to be a big part of Creative Aura. But the second piece to that, friend, which you mentioned, was the community piece. That's one specific area that I know Mary and I are really excited about continuing to
Mm-hmm.
build out in Creative Aura, finding like new in creative ways to connect with our creators, with our audience, with
Right.
folks that may be listening to the first time, but really, really focusing on the community element in the next year, next couple of years is going to be even more critical as we navigate post-election time period and the term of Donald Trump. I think on that note as well, one thing that is very grounding as all these changes are happening is, Mary said history repeats itself. And because history repeats itself, what is so incredible is that there has been already like so many scholars,
Mm-hmm.
Black women, women of color, like so many scholars have already spoken about ways to counteract when there is, a big conservative wave that, because
Right.
things repeat themselves, there's so much learning that we can get from people that have come before us. So like elders is something that I have gotten a lot of
Mm-hmm.
wisdom from in connecting with.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when I started, it's funny because when I heard about the like immigration, mass deportations, I went into fear mode. I was like, oh my gosh, like I started having
Yeah.
nightmares about it. um,
Yeah. It's
I was
valid. Yeah.
afraid. And I realized that my elder immigrant community was like not afraid at all. They were not afraid. And I was like, I was afraid, right? But they
Mm-hmm.
weren't, because again, with waves, things continue to happen again. And the immigrant
Mm-hmm.
community is very resilient. They've been the scapegoat for
Yeah.
really negative rhetoric for so long
Mm.
that this is something that they're quite used to dealing
Right.
with, to be
Right.
honest. And what has always made the immigrant community thrive has been the fact that they rely on each other, lean on each other. There's organizations in place, people in place that
Mm-hmm.
support each other. So
Right.
yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from our elders, from people that, like I said, I was shocked that the immigrant elders were like, yeah, it's fine, But
Yeah.
we're people,
We'll make it.
yeah, I was like,
Another
okay,
thing. We'll make it through.
yeah, we'll make
Right.
it through. Is so I think that was very grounding. That I feel like it
Mm.
feels like we're not prepared, but I do feel like we're prepared because we've been through
Mm.
this in history. We've been through it. It's a wave, it's a cycle. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that, and I think to your point, like they've been through this, they've seen this, and yeah, I think tapping into, like you said, the elders is really important. I also think I'm curious to hear like how we tap into like the creative space and processing and navigating again this future presidency. So just curious to hear your thoughts on the role of creativity, the role of the creatives in helping us navigate through like the times that are coming.
Yeah, absolutely, friend. I love this question. I'll only speak in terms of like as a creative, myself, what I feel my role is in the next, not just in the next 4 years, but just in terms of navigating, changes in my presence, in the government, all in my day-to-day life. I would say that I really feel like art is such a it's a form of expression that really allows
Mm-hmm.
us to, navigate our feelings or make a
Mm-hmm.
statement or share our thoughts. There's so many different value that art and creativity has. And so as
Mm-hmm.
a creative, I feel like it's my role to continue to, elevate, this platform and continue to pour into it to talk about issues that matter. Like having this
Yeah.
conversation today is, as a creator, is so important that we reflect on the election, that we talk about it and have commentary on it, and share our thoughts of how this will impact our craft and our platform. And so I think being vocal and expressing, using art as a tool to
Yep.
express ourselves and also like heal and keep us grounded in the next couple
Mm-hmm.
of years and even beyond that.
Thanks for tuning in. Creative Hora is a podcast production hosted by Dalia Zaragoza and Mary Figueroa. This episode is edited by Abdullah Kawish and is produced by akstudio.global.